The story of Victorian London is one of the foundational myths of the modern world. It is a story of progress, of industrial might, of an empire at its zenith. We are shown images of steam and steel, of heroic engineers taming a wild city, and of a population swelling with unstoppable energy. We are told that in the span of a single century, a modest city exploded into the largest and most advanced metropolis on Earth. A sprawling landscape of millions of brick homes, monumental train stations, and revolutionary subterranean infrastructure, all supposedly built from the ground up by the Victorians themselves. This story is comforting, it is linear, and it is a fiction. When you move past the grand narrative and look at the simple, cold data left behind, the census records, the mortality tables, the parish workhouse logs, the triumphant story begins to unravel. We are asked to believe that a population ravaged by disease, living in extreme poverty, with a life expectancy barely reaching middle age, possessed the capacity to execute one of the most ambitious and rapid construction projects in human history. The numbers do not support the narrative. The logistics defy common sense. In this investigation, we will use the Victorians' own records to demonstrate that the city they claim to have built is a mathematical and practical impossibility. We will not offer a convenient alternative. We will simply expose a contradiction that lies at the heart of our modern history. The question we are left with is not how they built London. The question is, who did? Before we examine the numbers, we must first look at the physical evidence. The visual reality of 19th-century London presents an immediate and profound anomaly. Look at the photographs and illustrations from the era. Look past the people in their period dress, and see the city itself. What you see is not a city in the process of being built. You see a city that is already complete, ancient, and impossibly vast. Consider the residential streets. Endless rows of brick terrace houses, stretching for miles in every direction. They are remarkably uniform, built to a consistent design, with a level of precision and scale that feels industrial, almost machinic. Yet we are told they were built by hand, brick, by small-scale developers and individual labor gangs. This urban fabric seems to appear almost at once, covering vast swaths of land with a dense, repeating pattern. It does not look organic. It lacks the chaotic, evolving signature of a city growing over time. Instead, it appears planned, implemented on a monolithic scale. Then, there are the grand monuments of the age. Structures like St. Pancras Station, with its soaring neo-Gothic archways, or the intricate ironwork of Tower Bridge. These are not merely functional buildings, they are colossal works of art, built with a level of detail and ornamentation that seems almost defiant in its excess. Why would a society struggling with such profound poverty and disease dedicate so much energy to such elaborate decoration? It is a level of craftsmanship that speaks of immense resources, time, and a highly skilled workforce. And beneath the ground, another world exists. Joseph Bazalgette's sewer system, a network of over 1,300 miles of brick-lined tunnels, and the London Underground, the world's first subterranean railway. These are not just engineering marvels, they are subterranean cathedrals, built to last for centuries. The visual message of this environment is one of permanence, power, and immense age. It feels less like something new, and more like the heavily inhabited ruins of a far grander civilization. The anomaly is this. The people in the photographs seem disconnected from the city they inhabit. They look small, transient, and overwhelmed. They appear to be living within a structure that was not built for them, a structure whose scale and grandeur dwarfs their own documented reality. The city does not fit the story. The story of Victorian progress falls apart entirely when confronted with simple, practical logistics. Let us consider the most basic component of this city, the brick. London is a city of brick. Billions upon billions of them. The official narrative suggests these were produced in brickfields surrounding the city, fired in kilns, and transported to building sites by horse and cart. Let's examine this claim. A single, typical terraced house required somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 bricks. To meet the demands of a population that grew by over 5 million people in a century, hundreds of new houses would need to be completed every week. This translates to tens of millions of bricks being produced, transported, and laid every single week. Imagine the logistics. The roads of London, already famously congested with carriages and omnibuses, would have been choked by an endless train of slow-moving, heavy carts, each carrying 1,000 or so bricks. The sheer volume of traffic required is staggering. Where did the labor come from? Brickmaking was grueling, manual work. Laying them was a skilled trade. We are talking about a permanent army of tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands of able-bodied men, dedicated solely to the task of brick production and construction. But the demographic data tells a different story. Life expectancy in the poorest boroughs was below 30. Infant mortality was catastrophically high. A huge percentage of the population was either too young, too old, or too sick to perform such demanding physical labor. The pool of available, healthy, skilled male workers was far, far smaller than the official story requires. Then there is the technology. While steam power was used for pumps and some heavy lifting, the vast majority of the work was manual. Tunnels were dug by hand with picks and shovels. Foundations were laid with manual labor. Each brick was lifted and placed by a human hand. The speed at which entire districts were supposedly erected is simply not plausible with this level of technology. Modern construction projects, with fleets of diesel-powered machinery, advanced cranes, and sophisticated supply chain management, often take years to complete a single large building. We are asked to believe that a pre-modern society, using little more than muscle, horsepower, and basic steam engines, built an entire megacity in a few decades. Consider the construction of the Victoria Embankment, a massive project to reclaim land from the Thames. It required the construction of a huge granite wall, the excavation of immense trenches for sewers and underground lines, and the moving of millions of tons of earth. All of this, accomplished in just a few years, right in the heart of a functioning city. The practical challenges of materials sourcing, transport, labor management, and engineering, on this scale, with the tools available, push the boundaries of credibility. It is not a question of whether it was difficult. It is a question of whether it was possible at all. When we turn to the official historical records to resolve these logistical impossibilities, we find not answers, but a profound and telling silence. The narrative is almost always presented in the passive voice. The district was developed, new housing was constructed, the railway was extended. The agent, the doer, is conspicuously absent. The story focuses on the great men, the Assembled Kingdom Brunels, the Joseph Bazalgettes. These men were undoubtedly brilliant engineers and visionaries. But they were not armies. A single man does not dig a tunnel. A single genius does not lay 1,000,000 bricks. The historical accounts celebrate the design, but consistently failed to document the execution. Where are the project management records? Where are the detailed ledgers for the vast housing developments that formed suburbs like Islington or Kensington? We should find records of massive labor recruitment, payrolls for tens of thousands of workers, supply chain manifests detailing the procurement of millions of tons of stone and timber, and schedules for the delivery of billions of bricks. These documents do not seem to exist on the scale required. What we find instead are small-scale records, a few dozen men employed here, a single street being built there, that cannot account for the sheer magnitude of the city that was created. The explanations that are offered are generic and inadequate. Phrases like the Industrial Revolution, a period of rapid urbanization, or the product of laissez-faire capitalism are used as catch-alls. These are not explanations, they are labels. They describe a phenomenon but fail to explain its mechanics. They tell us what happened, but they never adequately address how. This failure is most stark when you place the triumphant story of construction alongside the grim reality of Victorian public health records. The very same decades that saw the most explosive building boom were also marked by devastating cholera outbreaks, rampant typhoid, and chronic malnutrition. The official reports from social reformers of the time, like Henry Mayhew or Charles Booth, paint a picture of a population on the very edge of survival. How does a society in the grip of a constant public health crisis, with a significant portion of its people living in squalor, muster the surplus energy, capital, and social organization to undertake the biggest construction project in the history of the world? The two narratives are fundamentally incompatible. One of them must be wrong. The official story simply ignores this contradiction, presenting the two realities as if they existed in separate dimensions. The failure of the official account is not a lack of information. It is a failure of logic. It is a story that has never been properly audited. The anomaly of 19th-century London is not an isolated case. When we widen our view, we find the same baffling story repeating itself, with uncanny similarity, in major cities across the Western world. In the very same period, Paris was famously rebuilt by Baron Haussmann. Vienna constructed its monumental Ringstrasse. Budapest, Brussels, Rome, New York, Chicago all underwent a seemingly miraculous transformation. In the span of a few decades, they were reshaped with grand boulevards, massive public buildings, and extensive new infrastructure. And in every case, the official story is the same: it was a triumph of the new industrial age. But look closer. The architectural styles that emerge are strangely consistent. Neoclassical, Neo-Gothic, Second Empire. A specific set of Greco-Roman and medieval revivals appears almost simultaneously across continents. Why would dozens of distinct cultures, with their own unique building traditions, all converge on the same handful of architectural languages at the exact same moment in history? It suggests a level of cultural and technical coordination that the official narrative of competing nation-states does not account for. The scale is also a repeating motif. The massive, ornate central railway stations of London find their twins in Paris, in Milan, in Prague. The sprawling brick apartment blocks of Berlin echo the terraces of Manchester. The vast, underground sewer systems are not unique to London. They appear as a standard feature of the new 19th-century city. This was not organic growth. It looks like a template being rolled out. It's as if a pre-designed urban kit of parts was deployed globally. This pattern challenges the idea that these were independent national achievements. It suggests a shared origin, a common inheritance. The old cities, the small, medieval cores, are often dwarfed by this new, monumental layer. It looks less like an expansion and more like a complete replacement, or perhaps, the large-scale uncovering and renovation of something that was already there. When you see a photograph of a Parisian boulevard from the 1870s and a Viennese street from the same decade, the similarities in the scale, materials, and design philosophy are too strong to be a coincidence of fashion. They point to a common blueprint. The question then becomes magnified. It is not just who built London. It is who built the 19th century world. Was this really the work of dozens of newly industrializing nations, all spontaneously developing the same impossible capabilities and aesthetic tastes at once? Or are we looking at the evidence of a single, preceding chapter of history that has been systematically written out of our records? Let us set aside the grand theories and return to the simple, unforgiving logic of arithmetic. The official numbers, when examined, do not support the official story. They dismantle it. First, consider population versus housing. In 1801, the population of London was approximately 1 million. By 1901, it was over 6.5 million. This is a net increase of 5.5 million people. Let's use a conservative household size of 5 people. This means that over the course of 100 years, the city needed to add at least 1.1 million new homes. That averages out to 11,000 new homes per year, or 30 new, complete houses every single day, for a century. In the peak growth years of the mid-century, this number would have been far higher, perhaps 50 or 60 new houses per day. This calculation does not even include replacing old or dilapidated stock, nor does it account for the construction of factories, warehouses, shops, churches, schools, and massive public works. It is just the baseline housing requirement. Now, let's consider the workforce. We will be generous and ignore the horrific child mortality rates. Let's look at the life expectancy for an adult male laborer. In the 1840s and 50s, in many of the industrial areas, it was around 40 years. If a boy began a life of hard labor at age 12, he could provide, at most, 28 years of work before dying. From this, we must subtract time lost to severe injury and diseases like cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis, for which there were no cures and which were rampant. A significant portion of the potential workforce was always sick, dying, or already dead. The pool of consistently healthy, skilled men required to build 50 houses a day, plus the entire infrastructure of a megacity, simply does not appear in the demographic data. Finally, let's revisit the brick. 50 new houses a day, at an average of 40,000 bricks per house, equals 2 million bricks that needed to be laid every single day, just for housing. A highly skilled bricklayer, working a grueling 10-hour day, might lay 500 bricks. That means a standing army of at least 4,000 bricklayers was needed, working at peak efficiency, without holidays, sickness, or bad weather, just for this one task. This does not count the thousands more needed to build the sewers, the train lines, the factories, and the bridges. It doesn't count the tens of thousands needed to dig the clay, form the bricks, fire the kilns, and drive the carts. The numbers required become astronomical. When you assemble the equation, the number of houses needed, the number of bricks required, the time available, and the documented health and size of the population, the result is a logical impossibility. The numbers do not lie. The story we are told about how 19th century London was built is, by the measure of its own statistics, a fantasy. Faced with this cascade of logistical impossibilities and failed explanations, we are forced to consider an alternative. This is not a theory of fantasy or speculation about lost technologies. It is a simple, controlled hypothesis based on the evidence presented. The hypothesis is this: the Victorians did not build modern London from the ground up. They discovered it, they inherited it. The vast urban fabric, the endless terraces, the foundational infrastructure of sewers and tunnels, the grand public buildings, already existed at the dawn of the 19th century. What we call the Victorian building boom was not a project of creation, but a massive project of refurbishment, reclamation, and repurposing. This hypothesis elegantly resolves all the contradictions. The population explosion did not create the need for the city. The existence of millions of empty, available dwellings allowed the population explosion to happen. People flooded into London because the infrastructure to house them was already there. The logistical nightmare of construction disappears. The Victorians were not building 50 houses a day. They were merely making 50 existing houses habitable. They were clearing out centuries of accumulated earth, repairing roofs, installing new windows, and connecting existing sewer lines. This would still be a monumental task, but it is a logistically plausible one for the population and technology they had. The great engineering projects like the Bazalgette sewers or the Underground were not acts of primary creation, but of excavation, connection, and modernization of a far older, pre-existing system. This would explain the incredible quality and scale of the brickwork found deep underground. It was built by a different, more capable civilization. This hypothesis also explains the global pattern of standardized architecture. The cities of the 19th century look similar because they are all remnants of the same global, parent civilization. The Victorians and their counterparts in Paris and Vienna were not inventing neoclassicism, they were simply cleaning up and adopting the architectural style they found all around them. The official narrative was then constructed after the fact, a form of historical appropriation. It was a story designed to explain the origin of their magnificent inheritance, to frame it within a comforting narrative of their own progress and ingenuity. This does not require a secret, malicious conspiracy. It only requires the natural human tendency to claim the achievements of the past as one's own, and for history to be written to serve the story of the present. The physical evidence suggests a massive, unexplained inheritance. A city, and perhaps a world, left behind by a missing chapter in human history. We have examined the story of 19th century London not as a settled fact, but as a claim to be investigated. We have seen the visual anomaly of a city whose scale seems to dwarf its inhabitants. We have walked through the practical impossibility of its construction, the failure of its official records to provide a coherent explanation, the suspicious global pattern of its design, and the hard, uncompromising logic of the numbers. Each thread of inquiry leads us back to the same troubling conclusion. The story we have been told does not align with the evidence. The claim that an impoverished, disease-ridden population built one of the world's largest cities in a few decades with rudimentary tools is not just questionable. It is, by any rational measure, impossible. Our purpose here is not to provide a definitive answer. It is to demonstrate the legitimacy of the question. The evidence for a different history is not buried in a secret archive. It is written in the stone of our buildings, in the layout of our streets, and hidden in plain sight within the dry statistics of our own official records. We encourage you not to simply accept our hypothesis, but to use it as a lens. The next time you walk through the Victorian quarter of your own city, look up. See the scale, the detail, the impossible uniformity. Ask yourself, does this story make sense? Is this the work of the people described in our history books? Or are you walking through the repurposed ruins of a world you were never meant to know existed? The past is not over. It is not even past. It is simply waiting for a new generation of observers, willing to look at the evidence and ask the questions that have been ignored. The answers are all around us. If you believe these questions are worth asking, Subscribe to The Archivist for more investigations into the stories we think we know. Observe everything.